And the audience is now joining us.
Welcome everyone. I'm Sandrine Buteau. I'm the director of Albertine Bookstore, and I'm very pleased to welcome you this afternoon in New York or this evening in Paris for this online conversation between Mona Chollet and Gloria Steinem. Clémentine Goldszal will moderate the conversation, and Nicola Elliott will help to translate Mona's words. This is a book published by St. Martin's Press, and the editor Anna de Vries is with us today. We were longing to host this event since the book Sorcière, la puissance invaincue des femmes was published in France by the Édition La Découverte in September 2018. The book is one of our bestsellers in the nonfiction section of the bookstore, and every two months we were asking to our colleagues of the book department if they had news on an American publication. So we were more than happy when we heard that Anna de Vries picked up the book to publish it at St. Martin's Press. As she recalls it in her new book, published in France last fall, Réinventer l'amour, Mona Chollet met Gloria Steinem at Albertine in 2017. That year, our annual festival, Albertine, was dedicated to Feminism Without Borders, and for our honor and great pleasure, Gloria curated the festival along with Robin Morgan. It was her dream becoming reality to be able to work closely with Gloria, the legendary writer, political activist, and feminist organizer, and I think that everyone, from French and American authors and artists to the audience, still keeps vivid memories of these 5 days. I am very pleased to mention for our French audience that the French publishers Les Éditions du Portrait have just released 2 books by Gloria, Après le Black Power, La libération des femmes, et Comment j'ai commencé à écrire. I will let Anna de Vries present Mona Chollet and explain why she decided to publish Defenses of Witches. Anna is a senior editor at St. Martin's Press, and before that, she was an editor at Picador and Scribner. She acquires and edits a range of literary fiction and non-fiction. A few words on Clémentine Goldszal. She is a Paris-based writer and critic whose work has appeared in Le Monde, Vanity Fair France, Elle, and elsewhere. In 2017, she became a staff writer at Elle, where she supervised the organization of their very popular literary award, Le Prix des Lectrices de Elle. She also co-moderates Louis Media Book Club, a very popular book club podcast. In 2019, she was a laureate of le Prix NEC du journalisme littéraire, a prestigious literary prize awarded to a literary critic by a jury of peers. As always, we will leave some time for questions from the audience. If you want to ask a question, please use the Q&A tab on Zoom, and we will read the questions to our guest. It will be in around 40-45 minutes. I thank you very much, Gloria, Mona, Clémentine, Anna, and Nicola. I leave the mic and to Anna. I'm very and enjoy the conversation.
Thank you, Sandrine. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm grateful for Albertine and the Cultural Embassy for hosting the event, for Clémentine for moderating, and of course for Gloria Steinem for graciously giving her time to converse with Mona. I'm going to be short. I just want to say how thrilled I am that US readers will now have a chance to discover Mona and her work as I did several years ago. At the time, Mona's book was a bestseller in France, and Mona had almost single-handedly restarted a feminist discourse in that country, bringing awareness of inequality and injustice to a new generation. When I read her book, I understood why. Mona has a wonderful ability to illuminate in graceful yet clear prose the ways in which our society's treatment of women has not advanced very far past the days when they were hunted down and killed for being witches. Her thoughtful cultural analysis is fascinating because she discusses familiar US cultural examples, but also European literature and art, creating a rich analysis. I'm very much looking forward to hearing the discussion today. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Clémentine to begin.
Thank you, Anna. Hi, Gloria. Hi, Mona.
Hi.
It's such an honor to be speaking to both of you tonight. And thank you to everybody that organized this. As Sandrine and Anna just mentioned, In Defense of Witches came out in France in 2018. And Gloria, your work is being translated into French right now by several publications and les éditions du Portrait. But for a long time, your writings were not available in French. And as delighted as I am that you are both very relevant to the moment, I was wondering if either of you or both of you were sometimes a little discouraged by the idea that what you write and what you've been writing is still so relevant today.
Yes, we strive to make ourselves irrelevant, really, because that's the whole point of a social justice movement. You're quite right. But right now, I feel like I want to pay tribute to translators, because I think it's a profession of great importance and one that doesn't get enough praise. So I don't know whether there was singular or plural translators in this case, but I am very grateful.
Mona, do you wish to become irrelevant?
Oh, of course I do, but I'm afraid we will never be relevant because, I mean, patriarchy is there for such a long time, for centuries, more than centuries. So it's so deeply enrooted in our social organization, in our minds, and we see that the situation is far from good yet, but we see that as soon as we stop fighting, we start losing ground, losing rights again. So no, unfortunately, it's a constant battle with victories, of course, with setbacks and defeats. But we'll never have the luxury to stop fighting, I think.
Do either of you ever aspire to writing something else, about something else, or something else?
Well, but there isn't a something else. I mean, whatever you're writing, if you're assuming that, you know, that women matter as much as men, then it transforms whatever it is you're writing about, because the assumptions of the form of the family, the forms of government, even language are so much still based on that. So I have to say that I find it continually angering, exciting, engaging, you know, to be part of this, and also to be part of something that's global, you know, because here we are, you know, communicating across the Atlantic. I've just been talking to my friends in India who are, you know, engaged in the same, because I lived there for a couple of years. I mean, this is truly a global movement and a global community.
Mona, do you concur?
Yes, and there is a great pleasure to participate in this and to to feel the solidarity and to read what each other writes and what everyone writes about it, and to share our feelings and our experiences. So it's not it's not something sad. It's something really thrilling and interesting, intellectually interesting too. And my greatest regret is that sometimes I wish that more men would read what we write, because I think, well, they live with women, and sometimes it's astonishing to see how little they are interested in our way to talk about the world and to understand what we are going through. And yeah, maybe that's one of my regrets. And of course, sometimes you may feel that you are in a small I don't know, that you are writing about feminism is not being part of a big conversation, and it should be. At least in France, sometimes you have the feeling that you are in a very little corner, and that's too bad. But it's a global phenomenon, I think. White people read mostly things written by other white people, and so it's well, it's not surprising, but it's sad.
Yeah. Well, as Fran Lebowitz said the other day in Paris in a conversation, a book is not a mirror, a book is a window. And so I think if you start seeing your books as windows, then they become interesting for everybody. Mona, you quote Gloria's work extensively in Defense of Witches and in your other books too. I would like you to tell us about the first time that you encountered Gloria Steinem's work.
Wow, that's a good question. I remember, I think the first book I read was Revolution from Within, and it was a great reading. It was a revelation, really. And maybe because, you know, it's sometimes in France now we have this debate over I don't know, self-help and feminism, and the antagonism between self-help and feminism sometimes. And I think this book is such a beautiful reunion of the personal and the political. And the approach was so original and it was such a great reading, very agreeable to read. I don't know if that's a word. Anyway, so after that I read everything, I think, and yeah, it was at that time Gloria was not very well known in France. Strangely, I think Revolution from Within was translated in the 90s, but the book is not available anymore. And yeah, more generally, I read a lot of American feminists, and sometimes I regret that they are not translated in French. It's such a loss.
Yes.
Well,
yeah.
I hope that we are. This is why I'm so grateful to translators. I hope that we are able to read each other's words. But actually, Revolution from Within was not well reviewed here in the beginning either. I can't remember exactly what the New York Times or somebody said. It was as if Stalin were suddenly concerned with analysis or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I remember. Yes,
yeah, right. Something like that.
Yeah.
But as I traveled in my book tour across the country to California, reviews got better. But the idea of being concerned with or connecting, I would say, internal and external change was not popular in the beginning.
It's very Californian, maybe. It's
well, it's just real life. I mean, you know, the great oppression of racism and sexism and, you know, all of it, of international hierarchy, is that it convinces people ourselves that we are not equal. Think about colonialism, the long centuries of colonialism in Africa and here, you know, its internalization of inferiority is its most lethal result.
Yes.
You
Yes.
both you've both lived through many progress and many backlash in feminism, and I would like you to define briefly what you think is the moment today for feminism, both in France and in the US.
That's a big question. I don't know. Mona, are you ready to
I
take
don't
that
know.
on?
Well, in France, I think over the past 10 years, feminism evolved a lot for the better, and many questions that were in a blind spot for a long time emerged and were publicly displayed and discussed, and maybe it's mostly about the body, I would say, the body experience. I don't know. It's of course in the 70s there were all these battles for reproductive freedom and abortion freedom and abortion rights. But for a long time, French feminism was not very concerned with, I don't know, things like diet culture or so many experiences rooted in the body, and it was a very cerebral. I don't know if it's cerebral feminism, and I think it's largely because of the young generation of feminists took over social media and just, or I don't know, street harassment, for example. Young women started to talk about their daily lives on social media, and social media accounts became books, and now it's it must be completely different for young women now to grow up in such a context with so many tools.
Yes, I agree, because it's much more populist now and just part of daily life. And we too here, of course, were very enamored of de Beauvoir, and you know, it was very, very valuable, of course, yet it was not available from the bottom up, really, as a system of thought. So it's, in our case, comes much more from women speaking out locally about street violence or about access to reproductive rights or about, you know, all the populist, you know, issues. And in our case, too, we owe enormous amounts to the civil rights movement, which was also about that and very contagious. And often here, Black women were in the leadership of the women's movement because of that.
It makes me think that you both write a lot in the first person, and your writing is between autobiography and research. And I was wondering what you thought is the place for autobiography in feminist writing.
Well, I don't think we have the right or the intention to impose our experience on other people, but starting with our experience is starting with a truth that we are not imposing, but asking. We're stating it to see if other women share it.
Mona, do you agree?
Yes, I totally agree. I'm not a scholar. I'm not an academic. So for me, I'm a journalist. So I write books just to untangle problems that I'm facing. So it's a very simple to say I and to tell about my experience and my dilemmas sometimes, or my ambivalence, is a way to take the reader by the hand, and yeah, I have the hope that they will follow me, and sometimes they will agree, sometimes they will not agree, and share my experience or have a different one, and I like that as a reader too. So for me, it's the most natural way to write. And,
Yes, well, and I'm a journalist too, so the combination of being able to report as accurately as we can and also state our personal connection or lack of connection, whatever it is, to what we're writing is very precious. It's we owe something to technology, I have to say, because I think in the days when the telegraph machine was the total way of communicating across national boundaries, then journalism was much more committed to generalities and there was less room for personal experience. I'm told that Churchill actually was one of the pioneers in Africa of writing personally, but we do owe a lot to the ability to be both personal and reporting as accurately as we can to the technology we have.
Mona, you also call on to fictional characters in Defense of Witches, and you do this a lot to illustrate what you're trying to say or just to support your definition of some concepts. And I wonder whether either of you have ever thought or desired to write fiction yourselves, and if you think there is such a thing as feminist fiction.
Well, speaking for myself, I've never been tempted to write fiction. I do think there's such a thing as feminist fiction in the sense that it centers women not to the exclusion of men, but equally, at least, with men. But I don't know. Why is it that I'm not sure why it is that I've not been tempted to write fiction.
Maybe you were too busy doing something else, or
well,
something.
Also, reality is so endlessly intriguing and angering, as to what is being included in journalism and not, that it never for a moment occurred to me to write fiction.
Mona, are you a closeted novelist?
Oh, yes, I can understand that sometimes reality is enough, of course, but I love fiction and I'd love to be able to write fiction. It's my dream, but I'm not sure I'm very good at it, so maybe I'll never do it. And sometimes, yes, when I read novels, I can think of feminist novels, but I don't think they were written as such. I think maybe, I think of The Art of Joy by Gloria Steinem, an Italian writer, an amazing book, incredible book. Or The Signature of All Things by Elizabeth Gilbert, which is also a great novel with a very surprising female character. And of course, I don't think they sat at their desk and they said, okay, I will write a feminist novel, but the result is very different from what we usually read. And it's feminist in a way, but not on purpose. I think when you try to do it on purpose, it's terrible.
You two have something else in common, is that you don't have children. And not only don't you have children, but you wrote at length about your desire not to have children and why you don't have children. And Mona, you make it a whole chapter in Defense of Witches. And I would like you to explain to us how being a childless woman is instrumental to the definition of a witch.
Very often I notice that when sometimes people around me assume that because I didn't want children, that I don't like them, or that I could harm children. I don't know, that I hate them. And it's always been a surprise to me. And I think, why would you? It's not, I mean, I love my friends' kids and I care about them. I want them to be happy and to have a great life. And I think it's because people have this image of the witch in their mind, even if they are not aware of it, even if it's not, if they're not explicitly thinking of a witch. And of of course, back then, women were not targeted for not wanting children. It would be absurd to say that, but it was a time when people in power were very anxious about the fact that women could stop their pregnancy. Healers were targeted because they would help women to get an abortion. And there was also this myth of the Sabbath, and the Sabbath was a sexual orgy, but you could never come back pregnant. And it says a lot about the fears of the people who made up this myth. And yeah, it's a witch. And but it was now there are plenty of books and Instagram accounts about women who don't want children. Young feminists took over the subject, and they are very efficient about it. And for a long time, it was difficult in France because we have this Catholic heritage, and we have the highest birth rate in Europe, and we are very proud of it. And sometimes I don't know if they still do that, but there is a magazine called Paris Match would every year they would publish a story with a village in France where the biggest number of babies were born during the year, and all mothers had to pose behind the town hall. And well, it's hard to go against that and to just remind that there is another option.
Gloria, do you see a progress in the United States too, compared to the 70s, the 80s?
Well, I was just thinking that, I mean, in earlier decades of my life, people would sometimes say to me, "Aren't you sorry you don't have children?" And I would have to explain that, no, actually, I'm not sorry. I mean, I love having children in my life, but I don't feel as if I have an obligation. And in my case, it's hard to know what goes into our feelings. Partly, perhaps it was because my mother was not so well when I was growing up, so I was looking after her. And perhaps being a small person looking after a big person gave me a feeling that I didn't want to do that again, which of course is not quite fair. But whatever went into it, I feel absolutely no regret. And I feel able to be friends with children in a way that perhaps might be more difficult if they were my own.
Yeah. Mona, you were talking about, you want to add something?
Oh, yes, there is something strange. I feel very close to children, and I think it's because I don't have them. I mean, I never became a parent, so when my friends are trying to raise their children, I'm making a kind of sabotage because I'm on the side of the children, in fact. And and I remember my own childhood very vividly because nothing came between this time and now. So it's I think it's a nice connection to children when you don't have them.
Well, there is here a Native American saying or something that the very young and the very old can communicate in a special way because we are each closest to the unknown.
That's beautiful, yes.
Yeah, I love these ideas. Talking about having children and not having them, abortion is under great threat in the US right now. It has been for years, and it's not looking good. Do you see, Gloria and Mona, do you see the knowledge and practice of limiting birth going back to its former position outside the medical mainstream and going back into the hand of female healers like it used to be before abortion was legalized?
To speak for my own experience, I don't think so, because for one thing, there is such massive public support for safe and legal abortion, and for another, there is more means of birth control, the morning after pill, there are many more means to use than there used to be in the past. I'm sure there's a lot of pressure and will always be, especially from authoritarian systems. I mean, when Hitler was elected, and he was indeed elected, the very first thing he did the next morning was to padlock all the family planning clinics and declare abortion a crime against the state, because this was one power he did not have, right? And I think Mussolini did the same thing. So, we need to be aware of that as a personal freedom, the ability to decide whether or not to have children.
For men and women.
Yes, right.
Mona, we're in the middle of a presidential campaign in France, and abortion right and women's right are weirdly not that much discussed. How do you see this going?
Well, this campaign is such a disaster that it's not a surprise that it's not discussed. I mean, it's astonishing how bad the discussion is, and I think we are trying to just save what can be saved right now. And one of the candidates is a far-right candidate, one of the far-right candidates, because there are many. Eric Zemmour is a man who wrote this book 15 years ago, The First Sex, and of course it's a reference to Simone de Beauvoir, and he's not only an anti-Semite and a racist and an Islamophobic. He also hates women, and he has accusations of rape against him, just like Trump did. And of course, I hope he will not win. He's not supposed to win anyway. But no, it's the quality of the public debate right now is so low that I don't even have expectations on this. I think it's just in the society, and of course there is a big feminist struggle to keep these rights, but in the political sphere it's a mess.
Yeah. Gloria, in After Black Power, Women's Liberation, which just came out in French, I have to remind it, you wrote about the witch hunt of the Un-American Activities Committee. And it feels like lately, on both sides of the Atlantic, the term witch hunt is in fashion again. And it's used both by conservatives and by the far right. And I wanted to know how both of you see the use of the term witch hunt in the political discourse.
Well, the problem with it in general is that it assumes that being a witch was a bad thing. Mm-hmm. When in my understanding of history, the women who were called witches were healthcare workers. And perhaps they were sometimes called witches because women would go into their establishments pregnant and come out unpregnant. I don't know exactly what the thinking was, but witch somehow got to be a bad word. And from the beginning of the women's movement here in the 60s, there have been various writers trying to make it a good word, obviously with not complete success, but I think it's always been present as an understanding.
Mm-hmm. Mona?
Yeah, and there is this irony that men accused of sexual assault will complain about a witch hunt. Mm-hmm. And I remember while I was reading history books, I encountered at least 2 cases in which women were accused of witchcraft because they had themselves accused men of rape. And so these men tried to defend themselves and call them witches and have them burnt because it was a way for them to get out of trouble. And it's terrible, and it shows how inappropriate it is to birth this accusation.
No, maybe we should put together a global anthology called A Global Witch Hunt and name all the wonderful activist, brave feminists around the world.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Gloria, you were talking about translators, and I would like to give a shout out to the translator of In Defense of Witches, Sophie R. Lewis. She translated Violette Le Duc and Stendhal and Jules Verne. And Mona, your work is being translated all over the world. Gloria, same thing. I want to hear your thoughts on who should and could translate your work better. Do you think it's important that your words are translated by a woman?
You know, it's probably, but not definitively, I would say. I'm sure that there are men who could do a very, very good job. And there are some odd universals that I've discovered by accident. That is, for instance, in translating Alice Walker's work, Alice Walker, especially in the beginning, often wrote in the language of country people here. And I accidentally met first her Japanese and then her Chinese translator. And they both told me independently that they had used the language of country people in Japan and in China, which had never before been used in works of high literature. So I think if you make an honest, sincere effort, that it sort of carries its change wherever it goes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I tend to think that I worked with Sophie Lewis on the English translation, and it was such a pleasure to work with her and to be able to understand the translation for once. And yeah, I had the feeling that we were sharing an experience as women, and maybe it helped her to her translation is great, and maybe when there is such a close identification to the writer, it's easier to translate. I don't know. And anyway, as women are very often given less work in so many areas, it's good that at least when it's a feminist book, it's translated by a woman, I guess.
Gloria, you created Ms. in 1971, and it was the first feminist woman magazine. And Mona, you quote a lot of retrograde articles emanating from the woman press, as we call it, in Defense of Witches. And I wanted to know, what is your relationship to this press? And I mean, I work for Elle, as Sandrine said, so I'm concerned and engaged in this question. And I would like to know what you guys think the feminine press, so-called feminine press, should do to make itself better, to improve.
Well, to speak for our experience here, what was different about Ms. Magazine is that we didn't have advertising, or indeed couldn't get advertising. And so that freed us inadvertently from the regular commercial women's magazines, from their need to say things that pleased advertisers, or talk about advertised products, or at least not insult advertisers, right? So it made me realize how much women's magazines were in the thrall of advertisers.
Yeah, Mona?
I think for a very long time we didn't have the equivalent of Ms. Magazine in France. Now there is Cosette, but the director was a man for a very long time. I think it's not the case anymore, but it was a little strange. And I've always read the Feminine Press. The Feminine Press, is that the right? The women's magazine? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I've always been very interested in them, because I think with all their flaws and the fact that they depend on advertising so much, it's still a place where you can find articles about problems that the main press will never talk about. And I mean, what we call the presse généraliste, I mean, it's supposed to talk to everyone, but it's not, women have not a very big place in it. So it's still good to have magazines where you can find echoes of what women are going through, even if it's between an advertising for, I don't know, a diet and a fashion brand. And
yes, I hope that I mean, I was speaking of the past when Ms. Magazine began, but I hope that advertisers are not as dictatorial about the editorial text as they used to be.
They're not amazing right now. I don't know. Yeah, yeah. No comment. Gloria, you spent, this is my last question, but Gloria, you spent most of your life, it feels like, on picket fences and behind banners at protests. And Mona, you're a more discreet public persona. And I wanted to know what but you both are activists in your own ways. And I want to know what your relationship to activism is today.
You're asking me?
Both of you.
Okay. Well, in my case, and perhaps both of our cases, almost 2 years of COVID has changed the forms of activism, because we're much less likely to be able to have marches and group events, and we've become more invested in writing and online communication and small groups. I suspect that will change again, you know, that we will again have more mass events. And that's very important, that ability, because unless we're together with all the senses, we actually can't empathize completely. I mean, I'm told by my friendly neurologist that we don't manufacture oxytocin, which is the chemical that allows us not just to learn and you know, but also to empathize. And that, you know, what makes us want to help someone we don't know who we see having an accident is oxytocin. You know, it's what probably human beings, our species might not survive without that. So we probably are oxytocin deprived a bit. So I'm very glad that we will be able to be in each other's presence again.
Mona, where do you get your oxytocin from?
I'm very bad at activism, I must say. My way to contribute is to write books. I think of it as a way to help, and but in my daily life, I prefer to be, I don't know, with my friends or at home drinking tea, and it's yeah, it's a kind of a cliche, but I'm not very comfortable as a public persona. I'm not a speaker, and well, Gloria, I know that you weren't a speaker at first, and then you learned how to speak in public. But I'm having a hard time learning, so I almost renounced it. And well, why not? Why not just write books and
yes, no, please, yes. We don't all have to, you know, we get to choose the way to communicate. I'm so grateful that you're writing books, right?
Well, Mona, you did a wonderful job today, tonight, speaking to us, and I think you're a great speaker and a great writer, and this is your book. And now I'm gonna leave the mic to participants who have questions for you guys.
So we have a first question from Donika Gnagi. I'm not sure I'm saying it well, but Gloria was talking of fight for reproductive rights locally is how feminist ideas get widespread from the bottom up. In witches, Mona wrote how body autonomy and knowledge about contraceptive methods was deemed dangerous and women were accused of being witches. I would love to hear Gloria's and Mona discuss it.
Well, I think, I suspect that we're both saying that to be able to control one's own physical self and make decisions for oneself is the beginning basis of feminism. So I don't see these things as separate.
No, of course not. I'm not sure I understood the question right. Sorry. I'm not sure I understood the question right.
Shall I translate it into French, maybe?
Yeah, why not, please?
Alors, Gloria parlait de comment la lutte pour les droits reproductifs au niveau local et comment les idées féministes ont été répandues de manière générale en partant de la base vers le haut. Dans le livre sur les sorcières, Mona écrivait comment l'autonomie du corps et la connaissance sur les méthodes contraceptives a été considérée comme dangereuse et que les femmes étaient accusées d'être des sorcières. J'aimerais entendre Gloria et Mona parler de ça.
Okay, well, yes, I think it's in the 70s, for example, in France, of course, women had to perform abortions themselves, and there were a few collective groups that were doing it. The Black, for example, movement for freedom, contraceptive and abortive freedom, and they used the Carmen method, which was very simple and painless. And of course, it's very interesting to see how, and very often it was made in a very safe climate, and it was much easier for women than it might be now in the medical system, which is very violent sometimes towards women. And of course, it's very interesting, but we also need to live in a society where women are officially free to choose their pregnancies. So I think it can only be en dernier recours.
A last resort.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, my long ago speaking partner, Florence Kennedy, who perhaps is someone, whose work you've encountered, always used to say, if men could get pregnant, abortion would be a sacrament.
Yes. Yeah.
I have a question from Vanessa Jones. What is the link to Mona and Gloria to ecofeminism today for both of you?
Well, I may answer that. I think it's really interesting. I think it's very much misunderstood because many people believe that it's about a connection, a special connection between women and nature. And of course it's not. It's just the idea that women and nature were targeted together, that they were both were supposed to be wild and dangerous and had to be domesticated. So this fight against them was thought together. So we should also try to dismantle them together. And I like this idea very much. It's very powerful.
No, I do too. And I think the linkage is domination and the culturally masculine or frequently culturally masculine notion that a masculine gender identity depends on domination, whether it has to do with women or with nature. So if both women and nature are saying, hello, no, wait a minute, we have a logic and and rights, that are necessary and indeed necessary to the planet, then we join forces.
Yes, and I think that's the historical moment we are in right now, and it's so interesting.
Sorry. There is a question from Tanis Fowler-Corsi. She would be interested in what Mona and Gloria thought of the book The Witch's Hammer by Jane Stanton Hitchcock and the feminist theories mentioned in here.
Oh, I haven't read it, sorry.
Yes, and I haven't either. Maybe we should both write down this book and right.
Yeah, I think so.
I apologize to the author, right?
Me too.
So, either his, do either Mona or Gloria have a different perspective on women's relationship with their bodies as they get wiser, elder? Basically, do they think the relationship with self as a woman evolves with age?
Well, it does in the sense that our bodies are no longer possible areas of procreation. So there is a kind of freedom. I mean, it can be seen as a deprivation or a freedom, but I experience it as a freedom. And there is a kind of relationship between the little girl of, before 11 or 12 who's climbing trees and saying, I know what I want, I know what I think, and the woman who's, after 50 or 60, who's perhaps more free of either conforming to or defying, but anyway, living in consideration of the kind of gender prison.
Yeah, for me, it's only getting better, but it was so bad at first that it could only get better, I think. And,
What are you counting as? What are you counting as at first? How long?
I don't know. As a child and as a teenager, I had such a complicated relationship to my body, and maybe I saw too much advertising and perfect female bodies everywhere and too many magazines. I grew up in the 80s, and there was no critical look on all this at that time, and it was a very shallow time. So yeah, it was very harmful, I think. And I wrote an entire book about the cult of beauty and its dangers, and it was not sufficient in a way. I'm still working on it, and but it's interesting. It's a good thing to learn to free yourself from all this.
Yes, yes, yes. And age is a liberation in that way.
Yes, it's very strange because society tells you that when you grow old, you are supposed to lose your value as a woman, and I feel quite the opposite. I think it's so unfair because as we grow old, we become so much more confident and happy in our bodies, and it's
No,
so
I,
unfair
I
that
I agree. I have a kind of vision of an army of gray-haired, or perhaps somewhat concealing our gray hair, but anyway, women taking over the earth.
exactly. That's beautiful.
One last question going back to translators from Ocean Gatto. I think that you raised a very interesting question about how translators have the power to help with causes like feminism. And do you think that the fact that feminist work is being more and more translated today will help to raise awareness?
Oh, yes, I'm so grateful. I mean, I hope we can think of a way of elevating more the work of translators. It is just so important and in a way selfless. I mean, I don't want anybody to be selfless, but it's an art form of its own, and I think it deserves a much greater tribute.
Yes, I agree. I think books may be so important. I can remember so many books that changed my life, and I'm so grateful that people are translating them and making them available for a very large public. It's a great mission. It's beautiful.
it was the last question from the audience yet.
Okay.
Clémentine, maybe?
One last question. I actually do have one last question, but it's a tricky one because I can't think of anything else but Ukraine right now, as everybody else. And one of the things that have been striking to me in the news coverage of Ukraine is how the war always throws us back to very defined and expected gender roles. And so it's women and children. They're first and they're allowed to leave the country, and the men have to stay. And so, yes, some women fight, but all of a sudden this masculinity and Zelensky's masculinity for he's a hero, etc. I'm not discussing this, but his masculinity is a value. And we're at a time that we were deconstructing the value of masculinity. And now it feels like we're just being thrown back into it.
No,
and I would love, yeah.
No, I agree with you. We share this thought as we watch the coverage. And I think part of the problem is Putin's vision of masculinity. And I remember being briefly in Russia and seeing him in the distance. First of all, he's short, and I think he's worried about the fact that he's short. Secondly, he seemed to always be taking his shirt off. This to me is somewhat connected to the need to conquer, invade, dictate. And it's one more reason that we need to humanize the gender roles and get to be unique individuals, all with our shared humanity.
Yes, and I'm thinking of sexual violence because, of course, war means even broader sexual violence. So it's so we have so many reasons to be frightened for women in this context, of course.
Okay, well, thank you so much to both of you. Sandrine, you want to conclude? Oh, we can't hear you. Well, I'm going to conclude then, I guess. Sandrine, is your mic off? I don't know how to wrap it up. Yeah.
No, I just missed one question from the audience, and I want to give it. So there is a question from Maya Meyer. While the use of the word witch in European culture has evolved to have a very negative connotation, in traditional cultures of, for example, the Americas, a witch can be a woman with spiritual knowledge and power. Can you discuss how modern women may reclaim the title of word through the spiritual path?
Oh, that happens a lot.
Yeah, I mean, in the earlier days of the women's movement in this country, the word witch was taken up and honored and used, and I believe it was there was something, an acronym like the Women's International Terrorist Conspiracy in Hell. Right. That was part of the effort to reclaim in a positive way the power of the word.
Mona?
Yeah, sure. It was it has been the word has been reclaimed, and now we see the cultural industry taking over and offering us positive figures of witches. And I think the first one was Glinda in The Wizard of Oz, of course.
Oh, I never thought of that. Oh, that's so right.
Yeah, she was inspired by the author's stepmother, who was Matilda Jocelyn Gage, who was an activist against slavery, and she was the first to write about the witch hunts as a misogynistic enterprise, and she was a very remarkable woman, and she was his stepmother, so he made her a good witch and I think it was the first positive character, the first positive character of a witch in a fictional work.
No, I think you're right. And also there was a connection here in this country, in upstate New York, between the early activists and suffragists and Native American women who were in the same general area. there was a kind of communication that affected that too, because taking over the power of assisting and preventing birth, which Native American women were probably more expert at than the European American women. So it also lent to the description of a witch in a good way.
Ding dong. Witch is born.
Yeah.
Sandrine?
If one of you want to conclude, to have last word, Mona and Gloria.
Oh, Mona, what can we say?
That's tricky. That's hard. But anyway, I was delighted to talk to you. It was amazing.
Yes, it's such a gift to be able to join you in your kitchen. I'm very, very grateful. I hope we
admire my
actually
kitchen. Yes.
join each other in person soon. This is a big gift, and I think a very clear indication that this is a movement that knows no boundaries.
Sure.
Yes, read, buy books, not on Amazon. That's my conclusion.
Very good conclusion.
Okay, bye guys, girls.
Thank you to all of you. Thank you, Mona.
Have a nice day.
Thank you, Gloria.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Gloria. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.